Bueno, vale. Muy bien, pues hoy tenemos los temas 6, 61 y 63. Entonces, el 61 es el que tiene que ver con el cine y el 63 es el que tiene que ver con las instituciones, o al revés. Es al revés. 61 con el cine, eso es, lo está diciendo bien. Eso es. Vale. Bueno, pues vamos a empezar con el tema 6, que es el Written Communication, Kind of Written Text, Structures and Formal Elements, Norms Ruling the Written Text. Cuando hablamos de las normas que tienen o que gobiernan los textos escritos, tienen que ver con la puntuación, con los símbolos de puntuación, ¿verdad? Con la coma, el punto y coma, etcétera. Cuando poner los capital letters, etcétera. Porque la verdad es que los ingleses, en cuanto a lo que es escribir, claro, tienen una forma de, a la hora de escribir las mayúsculas diferente a los españoles. Los españoles prácticamente las mayúsculas las ponemos para después del punto y nombres propios, pero los ingleses sí que tienen otras, también otras normas que gobiernan bueno, pues esta forma de hablar, ¿no? Perdón, esta forma de escribir. Bueno, pues entonces vamos a ver, hoy nos vamos a centrar en el índice que tenemos a continuación, ¿vale? En el que tenemos, pues primero vamos a hablar de las diferencias que hay entre el lenguaje escrito y el lenguaje oral. Vamos a hablar también de los tipos de textos escritos, es decir, vamos a hacer una especie de refrito de todos los temas que hemos visto hasta el momento, porque este lo podemos sacar, bueno, esto sería la única parte que a lo mejor no se puede sacar de los demás. Pero, por ejemplo, cuando hablamos de los tipos de textos escritos, pues podemos acoger el tema 34 al 36. Los written text, aquí podemos hablar, por ejemplo, si queréis, de las funciones del lenguaje también. Un poco también bueno, pues si queréis hacer un refrito de todos los temas del 36 del 34 al 36, también se puede. El tema 4 podemos hablar de la competencia lingüística y hablar de background, hablar de las máximas de Grice, etcétera. Y lo único que sería diferente a lo mejor sería el punctuation, ¿vale? Pero realmente este es un tema, o bien podemos hacer de este tema el tema de referencia y luego a partir de aquí hacer refritos con los otros temas, del 34 al 36, incluso el 39, el 40, un poco por ahí. O si no, bueno, pues coger los otros temas e ir mezclándolo un poco en este tema. Este tema es un poco, sirve un poco para todo. Entonces no es un tema diferente, no es un tema complicado, sí que es un tema en el que hay que tener un poco, pues claro, cómo queremos darle ese enfoque, ¿vale? So, what's the first thing are we going to be looking at today? Today we're going to be looking at the differences between the oral language and the written language, and we will focus afterwards on the features of oral language. So first of all, what is the differences that what makes it different, the oral and the written language? What's the difference between these two concepts? Well, first of all, the oral language is grammatically complex, which means that when we speak, we usually tend to do simple sentences or complex sentences depending on how we express ourselves. But the majority of the time we speak, we don't tend to complete the sentence. Or what we do is we start a sentence, we introduce another information. So there's no continuity in this speech. So as a matter of fact, the capacity, the way we express ourselves usually is a bit more incorrect when we express in oral language than in written language, so, which makes our expression a bit more complex than common. Okay. Now, what about the lexis? That is the vocabulary that is used. First of all, when we speak in a language, we tend to use the words that we have. We tend to use a default style, and so the tendency is to use words that we are used to using every time. So we're not going to introduce very complex words or words that um, would appear more on other scenarios or of more technical words. In another language, what we're going to use is words that are common or typical of English. So common or typical, and very general words. So which makes us to express ourselves in a more simple way, and also allow us to really not to be as accurate as in a written text. Now, third is the verbalization. Usually, when we speak orally, no, eso es una redundancia. When we speak, we tend to use words that imply an action. So, action words. So that means that we are more there's more action in the way we speak. So there are more verbs, and so the sentences tend to be more simple in a way. Whereas when we write, there's a tendency to nominalize, to use a lot of nouns and to use a lot of abstraction rather than to be more concrete. And third and fourth, which is the offers negotiation of meaning. And this is the most important characteristic of the oral language. When we speak, when we are in a debate, um, we have the capacity of explaining or over-explaining, or even go round the question that we have, or the sentence that we have produced, or the statement that we have produced, in a way that we say, well, this is that, and then we can explain the concept what we're giving. Now, this is a good way, and so to clarify ideas, and to clarify in that precise moment of speaking something that do not happen in the written language. The written language does not allow us to express anything, or clarify any of the thoughts or ideas being written, right? Now, what about the written language? Well, the written language is grammatically simpler. That means because we use subject, verb, object, manner, place, and time, and usually the way we speak and the way we write tends to follow very simple patterns. That is, very simple sentences, rather than compound or compound complex sentences, or juxtaposed sentence. Usually, a juxtaposed sentence or a subordinate clause are more typical of the oral language, because we are trying to convert and to merge different meanings. Whereas when we write, we tend to be as explicit as possible and as accurate as possible, and to be also as clear as possible. That means in a way that we can um, that the reader, that the person who reads us, really understands what we're saying. So there's no need of any clarification, and because there's no way we can clarify things. You're not reading the article next to the person and just clarifying to the reader what are the thoughts that you have written down on paper, of course. However, despite the fact that the sentences are grammatically simpler, the lexics is complex. The lexics tend to be a bit more complex, tends to be more precise or more specific of a particular context, and so we need to have a lot more comprehension basis, so to really understand the text. So because the vocabulary used is more could be more abstract, but is more technical, more specific of the context, and so we need to understand that. Also, there's a lot of nominalization. What we were saying before, when we are speaking, the other one, to introduce a little bit of dynamism on your speech, you would tend to use more verbs rather than nouns. Whereas when you write, there's a great level of abstraction, and so to abstract yourself, you need more nouns. You need to nominalize certain actions so that to really understand this. And finally, and this is the problem of the written language, is that there's no negotiation of meaning. You cannot negotiate what you write. Once it's written, it's the other person to interpret your ideas. So you need to be as much pedagogical as possible. Okay, so what about the features of oral language? Well, first of all, in an oral language, the organization that we have is more of a phrasal organization, which means that we do not tend to make long sentences and long speeches because you bore the people. This is something, and this is very particular of our mothers, if you may. For example, my mom, she always, when she talks to me, she gives me these grand speech and with grand long sentences, and I really got bored, and sometimes I disconnect of these long sentences. Now, is she a good communicator? No, because what she's doing is trying to build up enormous sentences, which um, I do not have the capacity to understand the whole message. Whereas if you speak with a very little messages and very little words, or just a few words to express the idea and to be as clear and as direct as possible, in here, which it would be interesting to mention Grice with the concept of quantity and quality when he states that for Maxims, the quantity is that the less you speak, the better, and the quality, the better or the more clear you speak, the better. So what you need to do in an oral language is to express less, but very efficiently. In a sentence, in a written language, then it's more of a, you can write down long sentences because the people have got time to read, to sit down and read what you're expressing. For example, it's not the same when you say the green car, that I think that the green car is great. So usually, which one is more of an oral language? Well, the first one, the green car, great. Oh, great. Oh, great green car. Whereas the second would be more of a written language because you have a subordinate clause and a bigger clause, and it's well done. It's well realized. I think that green car is great. Even that would still be in oral language. A more written statement would be, I have the thought that that green automobile was outstanding or breathtaking. That would be more of a written language. And of course, depending on the type of text, because if you have a dialogic text, then there's no question about which sentences are good or not. But if you have an argumentative text or an expository text, then you might encounter sentences that are a bit longer and trying to link one thought to another, so a bit more complex in this way. Now, third, we have the fillers. The fillers are used to introduce new topics. Now, what is a filler? A filler is those hesitations, muletillas in Spanish, and which you introduce in your speech in order to give time to your brain to think about the next idea that you are going to produce. So by giving that hesitation moment, your brain is taking time so to connect to the next idea. Now, parallelisms, this is very typical of the oral language. You tend to use the same structures, the same verbs, the same adjectives, because those are the adjectives that you are currently using all the time. So the brain is very lazy. So what he's going to do is trying to do to be the most efficient muscle with the least effort. So again, what he's going to do, recount or recall those words that are used, or those words that you have, and use them, those words that you currently use, and use them everywhere. So that it allows, you can build up your speech with very few words. Now, that's something that also, again, refers to the parallelism, repeating certain structures, repeating certain ways of speaking. And that is something very typical and characteristic of every person. And that's why many of these comedians, they are able to reproduce certain speeches of certain famous people, because you see that there's certain patterns in the linguistic way on how they speak that allows them really to express themselves. Then we have the repair. Repair refers to the hesitations, to the corrections that you do on your own speech. You usually tend to speak properly, but sometimes you commit some certain mistakes, which you realize afterwards you have produced your own output. So what you do is to correct immediately afterwards. And finally, the oral language have got simple structures rather than subordinate or complex structures. So that means that we tend to use very simple messages, very simple sentences, subject verb, or subject verb and object. Or even if we want to give a specific idea or more specific information, then we would use subject verb object plus the the object. Right. So, what are the types of written text? Well, here is what I suggest you use the the theme. The information taken from themes 34 to 38, I think, 31, 32 to 36. Todo lo que son todos los tipos de texto. In it, we have different kind of text: the narrative text, the descriptive text, the argumentative text, or the expository text. Now, narrative tell us a story. The main action or the main function of this text is to entertain the people. It don't, some authors try to entertain others. Sorry, some authors do not try to entertain, but rather they try to moralize people about what they write. Also, the narrative text allows them that capacity. But usually, the narrative text, although the main idea and what people say about the authors and they try to moralize and teach people, sometimes the narrative texts are also used, not sometimes, but most of the times, and nowadays in the 21st century, are nowadays used to consume, to be entertained. Now, what about the descriptive text? Descriptive texts are more of texts that are more used to describe a certain situation or a certain idea or a certain object or a certain something that has to do with giving qualities and the main features of an object or of a situation or whatever it is that you need to describe. So usually what you're going to find out in a descriptive text is a static verb text full of adjectives and progressive forms of the verbs. When we talk about progressive forms, we're referring to the ing forms. Now, what about the argumentative text? What an argumentative text is seeks to convince people about something, seeks to, or whether it's convince or criticize something. So it depends a lot on the approach the writer is giving to the text. and there's a lot of subjectivity, of course, on this kind of on this kind of text. So, depending on what the author wants to do, we will be encountering what use of the kind of use of language, the either using a formal or informal language in the context in which they are, the audience to which they are addressing. All of these factors are going to influence the way we write an argumentative text. It's not the same when we write an editorial or a journalistic article where we try to hit the most or the vast majority of the people to inform when we write a paper on a very specific item, on a very specific aspect in which we are only going to expose that idea to a certain community. And now I'm thinking about a scientific text. All of them are argumentative, of course, but the way we employ the language and the way we employ the sentences is different. Now, and then we have the expository text, and the expository texts are usually, well, of trying to show certain ideas or show certain things, and so what we have is a denotative lexicon. So we try to be as clear as possible, not having second messages or second thoughts. Sorry, or second or hide messages. As we have it in argumentative text, or false expectations, or false messages that we want to give just to make the people feel happy or mad or bad. Minimal pair, mad or bad. Very interesting. And then we have also the indicative mood or the use of connectors such as thus or for example. Those are very interesting fillers or connectors because they most of the time allow us to explain things and to convey more about things, about the ideas we are expressing. Now, what kinds of expository text we have? Well, we have the deductive, the inductive. Deductive goes from a general aspect to a very specific aspect. The inductive goes from a very specific point to more general ideas. The synthesis, where we try to reduce to main ideas or main concepts, and we want to just make a quick report, or parallel structures that we develop two ideas at the same time, and so we believe as writers that they are equally important to the subject. Right. So, what is the structure of a written text? Now, text is a result of a connection between grammar and pragmatics. Now, what do we mean by this? Grammar is the way the way we express ourselves and the way we use the devices and language to express a meaning. And when we talk about this, we're making mention of the content words and the function words, and the combination of both to produce a cohesive and coherent message. All of that is grammar, which refers to how we're building up our speech, whether it's written or oral. However, we use pragmatics in order to give an idea, or in order to give in order to provide the ideas that we want to express, in order to state what we really want to say. And so the pragmatics help us to express ourselves. And so these structures of information consist of two things, of two ideas: the theme and the reme. The theme is already giving information, what we already know, us as a speaker, as writers, and also the audience. That is, there's a share information, if you may. There's a share information. Whereas the reme, it would be the giving information. It's something that you know, but your audience doesn't know. And so this is the process of communication, that conveying the new information. Sorry. So the type of structures, depending on the utterance, we have the digrammatic or the monorammatic. Sorry. The monorammatic are sentences that only contain marine. That is new information. So, for example, it's raining. There's nobody speaking on the room. You need to give always obviously a context. There's nobody speaking in the room. Everybody is just sitting on the sofas, apparently without looking at the looking through the window. And there's one person on the room that says, "Oh, look at the window. It's raining." So it's raining, and look at the window. They are giving our new information. You are trying to inform the rest of the audience about something that is happening outside the room. Diagrammatic would be we give a thing that is a giving information and a ring, a new information, and you use this combination of theme and ring so to connect to previous knowledge and so to allow people to understand what you're saying. So how do we do this? For example, Cristiano Ronaldo, the Portuguese footballer, scored another goal. What is the given information? Cristiano Ronaldo and the Portuguese footballer. Now, Portuguese footballer would be their theme, would be something that is already known by everybody. Everybody knows that Cristiano Ronaldo comes from Portugal. But what we don't know is what he has done recently, which he's scoring another goal. And that would be the theme. Sorry, the ring, the new information. So what are the kind of sentences that we have in English? Well, we have different kind of sentences. We have the simple sentence, the compound sentence, the complex sentence, and the compound complex sentences. Now, what are the simple sentences? Simple sentences refers to sentences that contain a subject and a verb, and it will also have object and complement. That is, the typical sentence that we write in a book. Subject, verb, object, manner, place, and time. This is the simple way of speaking and the simple way of conveying an idea. Of all the elements that I've shared of these simple sentences, the two that are compulsory is the subject and the verb. In English, it's always compulsory to establish a subject and a verb. Whereas in Spanish, we don't need to convey in a sentence the subject. We can omit it. Something that in English is impossible. Now, compound sentences contains two independent clauses that are linked by a semicolon, and so they call it juxtapose. For example, she dribbled over the defenders, she scored a goal. Now, here we've got two sentences that could appear completely on their own, and they would still have meaning and sense. There's no one that is dependent on the other. The complex sentence contains one independent clause and another subordinate clause. In this one, the subordinate clause uses a linking word so to relate to the previous sentence. And in here, we'll use the relative clause, relative pronouns such as the who or the which, or the double H elements such as the when, the while, the who. The who is a relative clause. The when, the while, the where, and well, those are also relative clauses, but depends on the function that we want to express, of course. And also, if we want to refer to causal elements, because or conditional sentences like if. And then we have the compound complex sentences that is combining a subordinate clause with a juxtaposed sentence. For example, he accomplished what today in the training session. That would be our independent clause, which is juxtaposed to the second subordinate clause. But he still needs to work on his physical condition, even though he seems not to be feeling very tired. Now, these sentences are not very common in English, and they're not very recommended in English to do, although they seem to be very common in Spanish. English, most of the time, accepts only the complex sentences and the simple sentences. not compound complex sentences, not very common in English. So how do we link the sentences? We can link in two ways, in a syntactic way or in a synthetic way. A synthetic way means that they lack of connectors. There's a lot of juxtaposition, for example, for example, fast or strongly, he kicked the ball. The first goal was scored. Now, here what we're giving is a lot of rhythm and a lot of dynamism to the sentence. So what we want is to express something quick. So that why is what we avoid the conjunctions and we insert commas. So in order to keep up with the pace of speaking, so we really want to express the main idea that he scored a goal, but we also want to express how he did it. So we give a lot of commas. Now this is very particular of the oral language. Synthetic would be the use of conjunctions, which is more typical of a written language. Fast and strongly, he kicked the ball and he scored the first goal. Now here what we see is that there's more, there's no as hurried speech as in the first one. The first one really wants to convey fast and strongly, he kicked the ball and the first goal was scored. So it really, when we produce the first sentence, we are out of breath at the end. However, in the second one, there is a more calm situation, which allow us to not to finish the sentence without losing our breath. So what are the rules of a written text? When we deal with text and when we deal with the written text, we have to be loyal or at least to respect certain rules. And in these rules that we have to respect comes our friend Bogran, the Bogran. The Bogran establishes a text in order to be a text needs to fulfill 7 standards of textuality. Now, these 7 standards of textuality are the cohesion and the coherence. Cohesion referring to the work on the grammatical aspect of the text, that is the ellipses, the substitutions, the dative pronouns, etc. Everything that allows us to build up the text and to give a coherent way of a coherent text. Cohesive text. Coherence refers more to how we relate one to each other, how we relate one idea to another. And so if the text and the ideas shown in the text are coherent. Now, what about the intentionality? Intentionality refers more to the more pragmatical aspect of the text. Intentionality refers to the intention the author wants to convey through the sentences that they use, or through the letters that he uses, or through what he writes is what he wants to express, what he really wants to express, what's the intention underneath what he has produced or uttered. Acceptability is whether the audience that writes and listens to the person accepts what he's saying. The informativity refers to the new information, how information is conveyed, how it refers to the context. Situationality refers to the interpretation of the text. And intertextuality recognizes old text or old traces, or refers more to the relation that is between other texts, that is to the genres, more related to genre. So what about the coherence? What is coherence? Well, here we have the rhetorical structure theory. Now, the rhetorical structure theory refers to how we build up our arguments. How do we express our arguments? And this idea was formulated by William Mann and Senator Thompson in 1988. And what they basically says is that the text has nuclear structures, that is, main ideas, main contents that we want to express, an idea that we really want to express in the content and we want to make it clear. But we need to build up the whole text. We need to build up different sentences, so to link with the nuclear idea, to the nuclear structure, to the main idea. And so what we do is to add different information, so in order to build up the nuclear structure. Now, this information that is not necessary or that is extra is called the satellite information. Now, this is very important because by combining the nuclear structure, which is the main idea, is the main information, the most important thing in the text, with the satellite structure, which is information, extra information that really is not necessary, but it allows us to build up the whole message, is what we have this rhetoric. When we want to convince someone, we can just add to the sentence of what we want, or we want to add the sentence with the idea that we want, with the combining it with different information. You know, if we want to have people on our side, we need the satellite position to give more information and to back our nuclear structure. Right. What are the rules, or what do we say by the punctuation? Well, punctuation enables us to write or to give order to the passages in the written language. Now, these punctuation items are the full stop, the commas, the semicolons, the colons, the brackets, the dashes, the hyphens, the inverted commas, or the quotation marks. Now, full stops usually, well, we'll say it in a minute. Full stops are usually done to end an idea. Commas is to add more information and to give a bit more rhythm to the information. Brackets usually are used to give extra information that it's interesting or important in that moment. Hyphens to clarify ideas. Inverted commas to include certain citation or to cite some words that do not belong to the same idea, to the same language, etc. So then we have suprasegmental features, which are the question marks or the exclamation marks or the apostrophe, which are more of an oral language, but allow us also to introduce them into the written language in order to prompt certain ideas in the text. So what about the punctuation? Well, we have the comma, which allow us to list using the minor sentences, or also after greeting. What about the semicolons? Semicolons used to express or to give ideas, general items, or opposing ideas. Then we have the colons, which refers more to the dialogues, to the long list of vocabulary you want, and full stop to separate ideas. So now, what about more specific? When we have the question of the exclamation marks, is first to mark a question, second to surprise or to make a command. We use them more to emphasize and in a very informal context. This is very used in dialogic texts. Now, quotation marks usually introduced to refer to someone or to the idea that has been conveyed by another person, and they are very common in academic texts. So to refer to ideas, to this intellectual property of other people that have thought previously about that, and so to insert them into your text. So to respect in a way. The commas, what we see, we have them after question tags, after discourse marker. We don't use in defining clauses or at the end of a list. The dashes are used similarly to commas, but just for informal writing. And the bracket is to give some extra information, usually a bit irrelevant. When do we use the capital letters? Well, in Spanish, we use the capital letters after the beginning of a text or after the full stop, no more. Or we use also for proper names, nombres propios, or for ranks or authorities. In English, on the contrary, we use the capital letters for days and months. We use the capital letters for the first person singular. We use the capital letters for inhabitants, provinces, counties, etc. We use the adjectives. So, for example, like that are or evolved from a name, the Darwin theory, and we use capitals for the main words of songs, books, films, or articles. Now, all of these texts we arrive or we end with the conclusion by saying that this theme is kind of important for us teachers because it gives a greater scope of how to write a text. Understanding the philosophy beneath the written text is a key concept. So to allow the students to be able to write properly and to use properly the commas, the colons, to write cohesively and coherently, to respect the rules of intertextuality, to understand the differences between the oral language and the written language, and there is certain concepts in contexts that you need to write in different ways. So you need to adapt your speech to the place or to the context that you are, and so that's very important. Now these we end up with the bibliography. Now, any questions so far? No. Sí. Bien. Pues dame 2 minutos que voy a poner un vaso de agua y volvemos, ¿vale? Voy a silenciar aquí y ahora volvemos. Bueno, pues ya estoy aquí de nuevo. Vale, pues este ya está, el tema 6 ya lo hemos visto, o sea que voy a cerrar aquí y vamos a compartir el siguiente, que es el tema 61. ¿De acuerdo? Vamos a hablar del cine. Voy a compartir la pantalla. Bueno, un aviso para todos. Lo he estado diciendo al principio. El próximo sábado, en vez de empezar a las 9:30, empezaremos a las 9, por favor. Ya sé que eso es media hora antes, pero es que tengo un compromiso familiar y necesito empezar antes para poder tener tiempo para atender este compromiso. Entonces, si podemos empezar a las 9, lo agradezco. ¿Vale? Entonces, nada, simplemente avisaros de eso para el próximo día. Si todo el mundo puede, pues me gustaría empezar a las 9. Vale. Bueno, pues una vez dicho esta cuña publicitaria, continuamos con el tema 61, que es el cine. Bueno, este es un tema que, claro, es un tema chulísimo, que depende mucho también de lo que queráis hacer cada uno. Son temas personales en los que depende mucho de lo que cada uno piense o de las películas que haya visto o de todo, o sea, el bagaje que tengáis cada uno de vosotros, porque realmente son temas que los podemos ver desde un punto de vista teórico, pero realmente hay cosas que, bueno, pues hay gente que ha visto más cine británico, más cine americano, considera que hay unas películas que son más importantes, no sé, o sea, es un poco de apreciación. Sí que es verdad que hay cosas eh, que podemos hablar sobre el aspecto técnico, ¿vale? Y luego, bueno, pues nos habla de Influence of Cinema in the Spread of Literary Production. O sea, que hablamos de un poco de las películas que se han hecho también sobre las adaptaciones literarias. Aquí se nota que el que ha escrito o los que ponen estos temas, pues se nota que son temas completamente desactualizados. Me refiero temas a lo que son los títulos de los temas de la oposición, porque aquí podríamos hablar simplemente del cine, nada, no relacionándolo con la literatura, porque realmente ahora mismo hay muchas películas, sobre todo de Pinewood eh, Studios, que bueno, pues que habla de Thor, que es una película británica. Thor, la de Marvel, es película británica, o sea, está clasificada como película británica. Pero bueno, esto no nos tiene que importar porque realmente lo que nos pide la administración es que nos aprendamos este tema para probar. Por lo tanto, hay que aprenderse el tema que tiene la administración. Podemos discutir, podemos no estar de acuerdo, pero es la administración, así que al final hay que pasar por el aro. Bueno, pues entonces, ¿cuál es el índice que tenemos a nuestra disposición hoy? Pues el índice del que vamos a hablar hoy en este tema se va a referir primero a lo que son los orígenes del cine, en segundo lugar a la evolución del cine, la adaptación de los clásicos literarios y luego hablaremos también un poco del cine del cinema and English literature and cinema and American literature. Y aquí pues hay un poco de libertad por parte de cada uno de expresar un poco lo que cada uno buenamente pueda o lo que hay de cambiarlo o de escribirlo según le venga o según la experiencia cinematográfica que tenga. Right. So let's have a look. The origins of cinema. Well, the origins of cinema start with the Lumiere brothers in 1895, where they invented the machine to record images, and so allowing they invented this machine, so which then allowed the rest of the people that used this invention to produce films of very short duration or films of great duration. Well, we've got three different conceptions of cinema in 1920. The first conception, the first idea of the cinema is given by the Lumiere brothers, who used their invention to capture reality. The Lumiere brothers really did not the concept of cinema by Lumiere brothers was not cinema as such, but rather of just recording images. Really, their idea was to not recount the story, not to entertain anybody, but just to use those images so to show it to the rest of the people, just as a way of sharing information in another format. The two main films that they produced were The Sortie des Ouvrières and The Arrival of the Train. Now, these are just 2 minutes film, which just appears a train arriving to the station and how it's recorded. You can find it in Wikipedia or in YouTube. I think it's very simple to see it. And then we have the Melier conception, which is based on the idea of the carnival, of people dressing up, giving it a bit of fantasy air, a bit more of a more in consonance with the theatrical performance and not of capturing reality, but just telling a story, trying to entertain people. And so one of the most important movies of the time was the Le Voyage dans la Lune. And then we have the Griffith conception, which starts really in the 1950s, which kind of is seen or is interpreted, or many criticism says that Griffith is like the father of the cinema. He's really, by the way, he make up stories, and so he seems that the most, or his most two remarkable films are Intolerance and The Birth of a Nation. Well, what about the evolution of the cinema? The evolution, the cinema has gone through different stages at different times. The first one is the 1920s, called the silent era, where cinema was a popular and affordable show, just a way to entertain the people. There were no color, there were no sound, just only very kinesthetic way of performing something in front of the audience. The most remarkable author of the time was Charles Chaplin, and usually this kind of cinema had these off voice who recount what was happening, or it was displayed a slide where they explained what was happening on the scene. Now there is one movie, Singing in the Rain, I think. Yes, Singing in the Rain, which really refers to this idea, to how the movies were in the 1920s, and because the authors did not have any voice, they were just the casting was done because of their physical appearance, not on the voice. And so, in the movie of Singing in the Rain, I think it's Singing in the Rain. Yo creo que es Cantando bajo la lluvia. Okay. Yo creo que sí. You see that there is one lady that her voice is very low, and sorry, very loud, muy aguda, and it really has a very ugly voice. And so when the cinema turns into color and sound, what the people realize is that she was very beautiful, but she had a very ugly voice, and so the people reject her. Well, during this period in the 1920s, what we have is just a combination of different perspectives. Now, this is the good thing about this theatre. So, in order not to bore people with images, they needed to include different perspectives and different captures every now around the scene and how the scene was taken. Now, in the 1940s and the 1960s, it's called as the American Golden Age. It seems that very intellectual people during these 20 years, and cinema is conceived as something more intellectual than entertaining. Now, these are the period of very creative moment, and where there's a merging between the literary context and the cinematic context. Now, cinema depending on literature as well as literature depending on cinema, and that is why I believe this is the name of the topic, because this happened until the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s starts this cinema, this consumerism cinema based basically on grand productions that has nothing to do with literature at all, just grand productions so to entertain people. So, but during this period in America is where, well, this is grand productions based on literary actions, etc. One of them, the examples is Gone with the Wind. And also during this period, we also tend to the spread of communism and the fight against this communism spread of this communist threat. And so the Marxism was very there's the Marxism policy, which was the policy to persecute the communists in Hollywood was very present at the moment. At that moment, 1960s would be the new wave, la nouvelle vague, which would appear in France. This is the a more experimental cinema. They experiment with images, with the surrealism ideas with the cinema. They do not try to entertain, not to convey any story, but just to experiment with cinema. And so we have Jean-François Truffaut and Jean-Luc Godard. Now, the features of this kind of cinema is first the focused on light, focused on perspective, how the light, how the perspective affect the cinema, and so experiment with the images. And so also trying to use as much captivating as much reality as possible, and in a way accepting this ambiguity that happens in the cinema. 1980s onwards, it would be the use of different techniques. Star Wars would be is kind of the appearance or the start of a new age in cinema, and the conception of the cinema as another as a source of consume or as an entertainment. Cinema is no longer considered, well, is still considered the art, but it's also considered as an industry and as a form of entertainment. Now, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and so on. These films are films done to entertain the people, to entertain the masses. Now, what about what are the main differences between cinema and literature? What makes cinema and literature different? Although they seem to be very near one to each from each other, but they're not. What makes cinema different to literature, and what makes cinema to be considered seventh art rather than an art within the literature? First of all, because of the icons and signs. Films are made of icons. Icons is really refers to images in the film have more direct relationship to what it describes. Really, when we an icon, for example, and this is interesting. When we looked at advertisings, what we're looking at, the image or the advertising that we're looking at in a minute, that last day advertisement, is just icons. And it is where we are relating an idea to the image. So the fact of George Clooney appearing in a Parisian apartment with Julia Roberts and this French actor, I can't recall his name now, advertising the Nespresso idea, or the Nespresso capsule, is an icon, is purely an icon. And what is the message? Well, the message is that Nespresso is used among the sophisticated people. Nespresso is used in very luxurious apartments. Nespresso is something of a lux that brings you more near to these grand Hollywood stars. So if you buy an espresso, then you get this idea. So really, there's an icon, there's a more relationship to what is shown and what it describes. Is a more intelligible. So there's no interpretation. It's something direct. Whereas in literature, there is more of signs. There's no icons. There's no such direct relationship. There's signs. There's symbolism that depends on the person reading. Depends on the experience of the person reading, and depends of how it's been described and how it's been used. Of course. Number two is the surface and the interior. Usually, cinema is more of a superficial reading of reality. Now, cinema has to entertain people for 1 hour and a half, 2 hours the most. Now, during these 2 hours or during 1 hour and a half, The people are entertained, but the problem is that the scope that is given to the story in the cinema is a very superficial. There's a lot of images, but there's no you do not go deep into the story. You just go on the surface. You consume quickly what is happening. Whereas in the reading, when in story that is written, literature, you spend more than 1 hour and 2 hours reading. You spend kind of a week or a month or even or more than 2 or 3 months reading something. So there is a more the introspective way of vision on the book. There is a more they allow us to reflect more on what the author is saying, what the author is expressing. So there is a greater analysis of what is being expressed in the book. What about the narration? Well, in the novels, there's a lot of narrators. There's kind of different narrators. Usually, there's the omniscient narrator, the third-person narrator, the first-person narrator. Whereas in the cinema, usually there's no narrator at all. It's just third person and things that happens to the protagonist of the film. So really, the protagonist in the cinema is shared protagonism. Shared protagonism among the different characters that appear. So there's the first person singular characters. Whereas in the book, there's a sort of regression or abstraction, and there's a third person singular or omniscient narrator that tell us the story, and we see or we analyze the author, the protagonist, from another perspective rather than in the film itself, where we have a direct contact with the characters. Well, what about the sound and silence? Sound refers to the music that is behind the scenes, something that does not happen in the book. Sometimes my wife reads things in Twitter, and there's one Twitter man tells a story, and he shares also a list of the Spotify so that to read while we read the thread. Well, you can do it if you go to, for example, to a bookshop that is very well progressive and fancy and so on. They have also these jazz music on playing on in the library and so, or in the bookshop. Well, but it's not the same thing. When we watch a film, the music that is given to each scene augments augments the intensity of the scene. Something different happens with the book. When you read in book, there's no music in it. There's no intensity, or there's no emphasizing on the climax of the action. So really, in that sense, the cinema is more appealing, more attractive, because it really makes us feel more emotions rather than in the book. Well, public and intimate. There is a difference also between the cinema and the literature. Cinema is public. You go to the cinema and you sit on a big room with other people that you may not know, and you watch a movie. Now, a book, usually you sit down in a room, usually with nobody around you, and there's a more kind of real intimate relation with the book. So there's more intimate. It's a moment for you. It's a moment for you to cultivate yourself rather than in the cinema. The cinema is more of a social aspect, more of an entertainment thing. All right, what about the technical aspects of the cinema? Well, first of all, let's speak about the scenery. The scenery, we have different types of scenery, the interior and the exterior scenery. And also we have the artificial and the realistic. types of artificial would be, for example, Star Wars is completely artificial movie, whereas realistic we could refer to Ken Loach movie films, which are very realistic and they deal more on the working class problems. Now, there's two approaches to the scenery: the impressionist and the expressionist. Now, the impressionist is the scenery has no symbolism; it means what it means. That is, this is, for example, Ken Loach's movies where there's no symbolism at all. It's a lot of realism. This is what happens in South London. This is what happens in Manchester. Now, you can observe how the reality is as it is. Now, the impressionist approach is more of a typical set of a Soviet cinema, rather than a cinema in Hollywood. Hollywood would be of a more symbolic scenery. Now, second, the scenery is chosen according to the psychological feature of the scene. Again, taking Ken Loach's films, Ken Loach's films are depressing. Usually, are used to denounce. Is a cinema that tries to denounce the situation in which most of the working class lives in the UK, and so the scenery that is chosen is also to convey this idea of depression. Now, also the scenery is chosen to reveal the state of mind of the characters. Usually, they try to convey the scene or the capture of the image according to how the characters are feeling at that time. And also the corrections are usually very natural. What about the expressionist? Well, the expressionist, the scenery is kind of subjective. That's a distortion, usually. These would be to films, for example, like Nymphomaniac, which is a French movie where the film is kind of complicated and even difficult to understand. Scenery is artificial and usually tries to give a distorted vision of reality and tries to give feelings of mystery, disharmony, or destabilization. What are the aspects of adapting literature to cinema? Well, first of all, a book have got a lot of details, and so cinema have to recount the same thing as what a book does in 1 hour and 30 minutes or 2 hours maximum. So sometimes what the people have to do, or what the film adapters or the film script do, is to adapt part of the cinema or part of the book to their version of the book. So that's why we always speak about versions of the book. Now, there are three ways of adapting a novel. First of all is the literal translation, which is taking the book, taking the story as it is, and trying to adapt it as much as possible to the cinema. This is what it has been done. This is very difficult, but sometimes could be something book that is being done in this way. The BBC adaptations, for example. The BBC adaptations try to be a sort of a literal translation of their book and to the cinema. Now, reinterpretations. The films carries a certain interpretation of the original work. This is, for example, the film of the Captain Alatriste. The Captain Alatriste is a book written by Reverte, and it's a collection of different stories. Now, the film Alatriste really is not the film of one of book. It's not the adaptation of one of the book, but just a mixture of the different adventures that happened to Alatriste during this collection of books that have been adapted to the book, to the cinema. And finally, we have the free adaptations, which is taking the idea of the book, for example, in this case, Heart of Darkness of Joseph Conrad, which has been adapted to film the film Apocalypse Now, and the Francis Ford Coppola. The setting is not the African continent during the 19th century, but rather the Asian continent in the 20th century, with the problem of the Vietnam War. Right, what is the role of the cinema in the diffusion of English and American literature? First of all, cinema has helped greatly to promote certain historical ideas. For example, the Middle Age. King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table has something that has been adapted a lot of different times in the English in the cinema. There's a lot of versions about the King Arthur, and there's different films on it, different versions. Some of them more fantastic, some of them more historical, but there's a lot of different versions. The contemporary tales, some of them have been adapted to cinema too. When we have also the Renaissance and the golden age of the British theatre, many of the Shakespeare plays have been correspondent to these versions. We have a Shakespeare in Love, which is also another film that has no really an adaptation, but also has been used to promote this English period of the English literature. The 16th and the 18th century, with the novels of Defoe, Swift, or even Fielding, have also been has given a lot of inspiration to the script and the directors to produce different films, which has been very successful. There are different versions of Jonathan Swift, Gulliver's Travel. Now, and also on Defoe's Robinson Crusoe being the most recent version, The Castaway made by Tom Hanks, which is a sort of a modern Robinson Crusoe. The 19th century with the Victorian period, which has given a lot of different films with Sense and Sensibility, Vanity Fair, Wuthering Heights. A lot of different ideas. Recently, the Lady Chatterley's Lover and by D.H. Lawrence, which is one of the first adaptations of this kind of books, or The Hours, which is a free adaptation of Virginia Woolf, Mrs. Dalloway. The 20th century and the 21st century also has been adapted to in the cinema with The Room of a View, or the different versions of Tolkien or J.K. Rowling, or even John Lewis. No, John Lewis es el Corte Inglés en inglés. ¿Cómo se llama este hombre? Lewis de Narnia. ¿Cómo se llama? ¿Cómo se llama el de Narnia? Lewis. C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis. ¿Vale? C.S. Lewis, which has done the Chronicles of Narnia. Right. Well, so what about the English literature and films too? Shakespeare. Shakespeare has been one of the most interpreted and adapted authors in the big screen. One of the most recognized actors that has interpreted quite a lot of different characters or Shakespearean characters is Kenneth Branagh, which is a British actor, very well known for his interpretations on Shakespeare's heroes. Well, about Shakespeare, there has been 250 films adaptations. The most recognizables were The Merchant of Venice, where it features Al Pacino, Romeo and Juliet, which was one of the hits of Leonardo DiCaprio, or Hamlet by Kenneth Branagh. which has a very a great soliloquy on Hamlet, and which I recommend you to see on YouTube. Well, what about the English literature? Apart from Shakespeare, we've got the Victorian period, which is giving also a great inspiration for the for many film directors. Emily Bronte with Wuthering Heights, or Jane Eyre with Charlotte Bronte. Jane Eyre, which has had a lot of different versions. The latest version is a bit more grey and dark version. You can see it, you can watch it on Netflix. Charles Dickens is one of the most adapted authors in cinema for commercial cinema. We also have Henry James, The Europeans, or The Golden Bough, or Ian Foster, for example, with the Horizon, in which we find Anthony Hopkins, or A Passage to India too. Okay, what about John Fowles, for example, one of the modernist writers, with The French Lieutenant Woman, with featuring Robert Redford and Meryl Streep, or Joseph Conrad, which has also have had certain adaptations with Jim, featuring Peter O'Toole, or Heart of Darkness with the version of Apocalypse Now, and then the literature, the fantasy literature of J.K. Rowling and Tolkien, on C.S. Lewis, on Narnia, The Lord of the Rings, and Harry Potter books. Okay, what about the American literature? Well, the American literature, we have the Herman Melville with the Moby Dick, which has been also adapted, a kind of different movies on it. The Red Badge of Courage, or Tom Sawyer, has also been certain films adaptations. Then also in the 20th century, Hemingway has also been adapted. There's now also Kilimanjaro. The Steinbecks has also had great success in the movies. For example, with The East of Eden, featuring James Dean as the role of Cal. We also have the Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, which has also different adaptations, the latest by Leonardo DiCaprio. Also, Chamberlain and Hammett with the Black Novels have also been adapted. Or or the theatrical plays by David Mamet, Glengarry Glen Rose, or The Death of a Salesman of Arthur Miller has also been adapted. The Crucible, featuring the ¿cómo se llama esta mujer? Demi Moore, and the Crucible, which is a novel from not a novel, a play from Arthur Miller. Demi Moore has also done the one on the Scarlet Letter, or Harper's Lee, How to Kill a Mockingbird, with Gregory Peck playing the lawyer of Atticus Finch. So there's kind of a lot of mixture, a lot of going on, a lot of inspirational literature to make different films. And finally, what makes a film to be British? Now, this is something interesting. The British Film Institute labels films in order and promotes them as British if it has a sort of a cultural test. Now, you have to have 16 different points out of 31 points to get this certificate of being a British film. Now, the cultural test has conditions, the certain conditions that need to be fulfilled. First, the character has to speak English. The British location has to be used, so it needs to be, the film has to be set in England, and the cast and the crew filming the film has also to be British. So the system of points would go like this. First of all, there are 4 sections. The section of cultural content, which has a total of 18 points. You have to, the film has to be set in the UK or in Europe, has to have an original recorded mainly in English, so the film has to be in English. The section B would be the cultural contribution, that there is a certain of promotion of British heritage. Section B has to do with the cultural hubs. So principal photography has to be set in England, in the UK. At least the music or the production of the SAM has also to be British production, and also they have these cultural practitioners where the director or the majority of the crew is from Britain. Now all of that will give you points which would allow you to really label your movie as British, and so you can touch some funding from Britain. And this is the end of theme 61. Give me 2 minutes and I will be back with theme 63. Vale. Bueno, pues entonces vamos a empezar con el tema 63, que sería el último tema de hoy. British Institution, Department, the Government, Political Parties and Electoral System, the Monarchy. Bueno, este tema es un tema bastante interesante, la verdad. Es un poco rollo, a lo mejor de escuchar y de desarrollar, porque tiene un componente así como más administrativo, de cómo funciona la administración en el Reino Unido. Luego tiene otra parte que es más curiosa, que es la monarquía, y bueno, podemos hablar de ahí de todo lo que puede ocurrir alrededor de la monarquía, pues la muerte de Isabel II, el problema que tiene Harry y Meghan. Podemos también hablar de los partidos políticos, de bueno, pues la tendencia del Partido Conservador con Rishi Sunak al poder y su contrario Keir Starmer. Bueno, una serie de cosas que sí que podemos hablar de manera cultural, pero también hay que hablar un poco de la organización del Reino Unido. La organización del Reino Unido es un poco compleja. No solamente es la Casa de los Comunes y la Casa de los Lores, sino luego Inglaterra como tal tiene dos niveles, digamos, de administración. Tenemos el nivel de lo que llaman el County Council y luego tenemos lo que es el District. Entonces yo entiendo que este County Council, en comparación con España, es lo que llamaríamos nosotros aquí como las diputaciones. Y los districts serían un poco así como una especie de ayuntamientos. Y luego ya tendríamos el tercer nivel, que ya sería más a nivel de ciudad o pueblo, que sería lo que son la administración local, que es el ayuntamiento como tal. Entonces, claro, en este sentido, los ingleses dicen que existen 21 county councils, que serían como una especie de diputaciones, y luego dentro de ahí tendríamos los 164 district councils. Y luego tendríamos partes del Reino Unido que solamente tienen un nivel de administrativo, que es digamos que son los llamados Unitary Authorities, y en los que cabe destacar, bueno, pues la mayor parte de estos Unitary Authorities que están a lo largo del Reino Unido, pero también aparece pues en la ciudad de Londres y los distritos y bueno, los barrios de Londres, ¿no? Entonces, vamos a empezar este último tema de esta mañana con el índice. Well, first of all, we're going to speak about the British institutions, the political parties, the electoral system, the monarchy, and then we will look at the final conclusion of today. So, what about the introduction? What about the introduction of this theme? First of all, let's recall that Britain has a long history of democracy. Really, the British, although we don't think as such, Britain has had a parliamentary monarchy since almost the 12th century, almost. When in this goes back to Henry II, when he decided to ask the noblemen for money to support the wars, and so in the noblemen by that time they were more powerful than the king himself, and that's one of the reasons why afterwards Henry VIII would call on the Act of Supremacy. The Act of Supremacy means that Henry VIII crowns himself as King of England and as head of the church. So trying to become this powerful monarch and establishing a powerful monarchy. However, the British monarchy has always been has had a sort of a complex relation with England. It has always been accepted, although its power has been minor, very little power. In fact, during the Hanoverians, in the 16th century, the power was officially held by the king, but it was really exercised by not the noblemen, by the chambers at the time. Also, for a little bit of time during the 16th century, and under Oliver Cromwell, who called himself as Lord Protector, there were no monarchy at all, and there was a sort of a parliamentary republic but it was not really not even a republic nor a monarchy. It was sort of a dictatorship by Cromwell. Well, despite these ideas, the British Parliament nowadays is divided into two chambers, to two houses: the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Really, the one who has power is the House of Commons, but still, the House of Lords has still a bit of power, has retained that power, and is kind of criticized because there are members in that house which have access to that house because of hereditary rights, and so is in a way keeping this classist classification of the British into noblemen and not noblemen. Well, the House of Commons is made up to 650 members, and the functions they have is first to elect the Prime Minister, and second to pass the tax bills. The House of Commons, they elect the Prime Minister, and it's then the Queen who appoints the cabinet of the Prime Minister, although this cabinet is made on the proposals of the Prime Minister. So really, the monarchy is just a more of a representative role. Now, when we have a look at the House of Commons in the UK, there are two sides with benches, one opposed to each other. And why? Well, first of all, because it remains of the past times when the king used to gather with the noblemen in churches, so to discuss the matters of the territory. Also, because it allowed more conversational tone rather than long speeches, allows to have more direct conversations. And if you have a look at the English Parliament, it really does have this conversational tone rather than in Spain, where everybody has their own discourse and they do not kind of talk among themselves. Each of them, they just give their speech. There's no conversation on the speeches, of course. Then there are no desks, no tables, not just a row of benches, which kind of again shows this idea, this importance of this conversation that has to be in between the leading party and the opposing party. And one of the things that the British tried to do until the first half of the 20th century was to remain amateurish. That means that there were no professional political people. The people that went to the parliament, they had their own businesses, and they saw politics as a second job, not as the main job. Now, how bills become a law? First, there's a first reading. The bill is read. There's not a debate, and so once it's read, then it's informed to the deputies about the law. The second reading is when the politicians have read over the law and they have pointed out the most important issues of the bill, and then and so they debate on what are those aspects that they do not agree, and so the bill is sent to a committee of experts to discuss more profoundly about the bill. And then the third is discuss over the possible amendments that can be done to the bill on certain areas. Now, if the House of Commons passes the law, then the law has to be passed on the House of Lords, who eventually would read the law, and if they have not any or they do not any objections to the law, then they would sign it, and then the law would then be sent to the Queen, so to the Queen, in this case to the King, so to the royal assent. Esto cambiarlo porque ya no es the Queen, sino the King, for his royal assent. Now, what about the Houses of Lords? The House of Lords are 798 members, divided into 2/3 are nobility. And now these are the kind of different lords: the Lord Spiritual, the Lord Temporal, and the Lord the Lord of Appeal. Sorry, the Lord of Appeal. Now, these 2/3 of nobility are hereditary peers. That means that the titles are passed on families, and so these families have the possibility to decide on certain matters concerning the UK. Life peers would be people of great curriculums that are recognized as to be wise people, and so they are granted with these with the prestige of belonging to the House of Lords, and having the capacity to judge over the laws that are passed on the Parliament. Then also we have the Lords of Appeal, which would be the High Court judges, who also decide on these political matters. And also we have the Lord Spiritual, which is made by 28 bishops. As you see, this chamber is rather conservative, and it's very criticized by most of the progressive party of the UK. Now, what about the functions? It has no tax bills function since 1910, when the House of Lords they decided not to support certain rising taxes, and so the King in 1910 decided to not, because the people were very angry at this decision of not raising taxes to the noblemen. The King decided to get rid of these, not get rid, but not grant this right of passing any law or discussing any law that had to do with taxation. So all the laws that has to do with taxation in the House of Commons go direct to royal assent. Now, they do not need to be accepted by the House of Lords. They can't exercise any veto to any taxation bills. They can exercise veto on other bills, but not on taxation bills. And also, very important that if in the House of Lords there's no an agreement over a fixed time, then the House of Commons can skip the House of Lords and send the bill to the royal assent. What about the government? Well, the government is made by the Prime Minister, the Cabinet, and the Ministers. The Prime Minister is elected by the House of Commons and informs the King. Sorry about this. So, what is the function of the Prime Minister? Well, first informing the King about the state, and then advising the King on which persons are the most suitable to be or to form the cabinet, and so the King would eventually form the new government. 3, the Prime Minister also supervises the job of the civil servants through the ministers. The cabinet is made of all the secretaries of all the ministerial departments, and every week the cabinet has to discuss on the most relevant issues on the kingdom. Now, the ministers, they are selected from the House of Commons and the House of Lords by the Prime Minister. There are 24 ministerial departments, which the most important is the Treasury and the Department of Education. Now, the Department of Education is responsible for the teacher recruitment and retention, also for the higher education. Each ministerial department have their own public agencies and public bodies. Very interesting. Now, sorry. How does a department work? We're going to take as example the Department of Education, which works with 18 agencies and public bodies throughout or divided throughout the UK. Now, what do we have first? We have the non-ministerial departments. These are agencies which are designed dependent on the Ministry of Education, which are designed to offer specific functions. We've got the Ofqual, which is the Office of Qualifications and Examinations Regulations, and this office is entirely dedicated to the A+ exams and the GCSE exams. These are the ones who design the exams and the vocational and the technical qualifications. They are public service, and they report directly to the Parliament, not to the Cabinet, not to the Prime Minister, but to the Parliament. And then we have the Ofsted, which is the Office for Standards in Education, which carries different inspections throughout the entire territory of Britain, looking for and checking the standards of education. Now, these Ofsted standards are just also dependent on the Ministry of Education, and they are also report directly to the Parliament. They are independent and impartial. These two agencies are very important because are the ones who set a bit the levels of education in the UK. Then we have the executive agency, which they have the standards, and they pass on the testing. We have the standards and testing agency, we have the teaching regulation agency, and the education funding agency. Then we have the non-departmental body of education, which their functions are: first, the constructions of the training board; secondly, the Institute for Apprenticeship and Technical Education, which is more related to the vocational training. We also have the Office for Students so to attend the difficulties that students may have with their studies. The Office of Children Commissioner, who is the one who looks for the well-being of children, and if they have any problem with teachers. And then we have the Students' Loan Company, which offers very low interest to students to continue with their studies. Well, we have the organization now of Britain. Britain is organized in 4 different territories. We have England, Scotland, Wales, and the Ulster. Now, the British government, the one who leads Rishi Sunak, decides over the entire country, but there are certain competencies on which are called the devolved competencies, and which are given or passed to the parliaments of each of the region or territories. And these devolved governments were the governments of Scotland, Ireland, Wales. They were shut down during the 19th century. All the important decisions were decided in London, and by 1998, with Tony Blair in the government, they devolved the parliaments back to the regions, to each of these territories, and with this devolved government, they have the capacity of making different laws based on the national laws that are passed on the English Parliament and the British Parliament, more or less like in Spain with the Comunidades Autónomas, which they have devolved competencies on most of the matters. In health, in England, these devolved governments, so Scotland, Wales, and Ulster would decide on the health, on education, culture, environment, and transport. They would have these competencies, and so the prime ministers, Rishi Sunak, or the others who come, do not have any competencies on this. They can decide over the laws, the making of the laws. Then the execution of these laws is falls onto the responsibility of these 4 territories. Now, what we were looking at, the local government or local councils are made up of different councillors elected by the public in local elections. There are kind of 2 levels of administration. The first level, which would be the county councils, and the second level, which would be the borough or the city councils. Now, within the first level, the first level would be like diputaciones, and these diputaciones could be are called in 2 ways: the county councils, which are 21 county councils around Britain, and also the district councils, which are more numerous, and there are there are around 164 councils. It's a kind of more complex idea and more complex distribution of the territories. Now, what about the political parties? Well, we have the political parties in the UK are two sides, the right and the left. And within these two political parties, then there are certain other political parties which have not such representation in the House of Commons, which are the Liberal Democrat Party and the Nationalists, which have more representation on the regional chambers or in the both parliaments. So what about the right parties? Well, we've got the UKIP or the Tories, which they believe that they should not be taxation or the least taxation possible. They're contrary to immigration, UKIP totally contrary to immigration, whereas the Tories are more to reduce the immigration. Now, the UKIP were in favour for Brexit. Now the ones who have to deal with this after Brexit is the Tories, who are dealing with it and who kind of have agreed on. It's not clear on the terms which they have agreed with the European Union about the Brexit. Nobody knows what are the terms. We know that Theresa May had to deal with the Brexit. Boris Johnson had to deal with the Brexit. Rishi Sunak is dealing with the Brexit, but there's no clear terms on how they're dealing with them. Now, we've got the Liberal Democrat Party, which they supported the right parties and the Tory parties during David Cameron in 2010, when they had a great number of very, very good results. But nowadays, they're not having these great results in the polls. Now we've got the left, the left party, the Green Party, for example, which they are for the increase on the taxation to have the environment. The most fighting party in the left is the Labour Party, with Keir Starmer trying to destabilise Rishi Sunak's government. Now, on the nationalist side, we've got the Scottish Nationalist Party, who are again pretending to do another referendum on the Scotland's independence on Britain, above all because they want to remain in the European Union, and so they're trying to go against the British government or the English government. Then we have the Welsh parties and the Ulster Party, who also are seeing themselves a bit in a difficult position with the situation in Ireland with the Brexit, where there's a frontier with the rest of the island. There's no clear idea on how that border would function in the years to come. Well, the elections. We know that there is a historical evolution of the elections with the reform bills. Now, a reform bill of 1872 was one of the most important because it allowed the male suffrage. After the fight of women through these two sections, the more violent and the more political. The more violent were the suffragists, with Emmeline Pankhurst as the leader of these wave of women vindicating for their own rights to have a vote and a voice in the political sphere, and then the suffragettes with being more political vindications. Now, after that, in 1918, women could vote, and by 1969, the universal suffrage was changed to the age of 18. Now, usually poll days are held on Thursdays for historical reasons. First, because Fridays because people went on the pump, so they were kind of drunk, and so they decided. And Saturday and Sundays were the day of church, so people would go to the church. And Thursdays were usually the market day, so people would not be going to poll days. So it seems that Thursday has to be the most appropriate day to go on elections day. Well, elections of Britain is divided into 650 constituencies, that is, como regiones, and each constituency has an average of around 90,000 inhabitants. And so each constituency votes for a member of parliament. And so each member of parliament, House of Commons, I'm saying. And so each of these constituencies, they elect directly their own representative on the House of Commons, more or less like in Spain. Well, the role of monarchy nowadays. Well, we have the monarchy is sort of a symbol of the Britain Union and a symbol of patriotism. Although there is kind of a lot of different territorial tensions. Both the Scots, the Welsh, and the English, they see themselves united by the Queen. By the King of England or by the monarchy. They have the right of veto, but they haven't exercised it since the 18th century. They are sort of the head of state and the head of the king of the Church of England, and still the people of Britain are subject to the king, to the monarchy. The monarchy in England has suffered kind of ups and downs on the popularity. Nowadays, there's the death of Queen Elizabeth II leans a bit of doubt on what would be the future of King Charles. Still, King Charles is kind of seems to be very prepared for the job. He's trying to introduce innovations in the monarchy, and also trying to associate himself with more young people rather than with old people that supported the Elizabeth II. Well, this is a theme particularly interesting for students and teachers who allow us to be updated on the English politics and the British politics, and also allow us to compare how the British administration functions and how our own administration functions. So to be aware of both administrations, but most of it of our own administration and how it works. And this is the end of today. 11:30. End of the class. Any questions?
Todo claro, clarinete. Muy clarito lo deja todo, Nacho.
Bueno, se procura.
Muy bien. Pues nada, chicos. Cerramos, ¿vale? Y volvemos a entrar. Nachete, disfruta el fin de.
Vale, el próximo día a las 9, por favor, acordaros. Por favor.
Lo recuerdo yo también por el WhatsApp, no os preocupéis.
Vale,
Próximo día a las 9. ¿Vale?
Vale.
Hasta luego. Vale, chicos, entramos ahora, ¿vale? Volvemos a entrar. Cierro la grabación y entramos.